Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Med School Admissions Tips Town Hall. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with our resident expert, Anita, to bring you important tips on the critical med school admissions interview. Before we begin, I'd like to just review a few housekeeping items. Everyone's microphones are currently on mute, so when you have questions, please use the questions panel and type your questions in the box. We'll be sure to have a Q&A and have some time to answer all of your questions. With that, I'm going to pass this over to Anita to get started.
Thank you very much. How are you guys doing today? So before we get started, one of the things that we wanted to do was to give an opportunity to have a little more dynamics and a little interaction. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint at the bottom and me at the top. So for those of you who are online, if you're online right now, could you just give me like a thumbs up or say yes, or that you can see me or something so that we know on the other side so they can let me know? Are you getting any feedback over there?
Yes, people can see you.
All right, we good to go. So let's roll. Okay, guys, because I can't actually see myself on my screen, so that's just why I wanted to make sure. And you can see the PowerPoint. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself and kind of how we got to this whole interview process. And today, really want to target some things to help you guys be as successful as possible in those all-important med school interviews. So a little bit about me, then we're going to do a quick poll to figure out where you guys are in the whole applying sort of scheme of things, so I know the audience that I'm talking to, and then we're going to jump right into things, and then I'm going to allow about 15 minutes at the end so we can do some question and answer time, because I know you guys will have lots of questions that may not cover, and so I want to get to them. And if we don't get to all of your questions, I just want to let you know that we'll keep a log of those, and we'll make sure to follow up to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So the first thing is, I didn't just wander into this. I'm actually the director of healthcare and medical admissions counseling here at the Princeton Review. So my whole job is really to work with people who want to get into med school, dental school, vet school, whatever, with all of the components. And that's everything from working up to things the time before, to doing your personal statement and your experiences, your secondaries, and the all-important interview prep, and all of the follow-up that's required after. I've actually been doing this for almost 20 years now. So I did my undergrad. I have a medical degree from UNC Chapel Hill. My background is family medicine and reproductive health and family planning. I have 2 PhDs in physiology and pharmacology from Wake Forest, as well as a master's in education. So, and don't be impressed, I didn't want to get a job. I worked for the World Health Organization for years. I actually developed contraceptive products and STD prevention products for third world countries. So if any of you guys have ever heard of Gardasil, that's actually, I did the very first research studies associated with Gardasil. I spent over 15 years working in the undergraduate realm, building and helping with pre-health programs. So I have been on that whole aspect, and I've worked with 5 different medical admission MD committees and 2 osteopathic committees. So I've been, you guys, wanting to apply, wanting to get in, going through that interview. I have worked and counseled over 10,000 students who have aspired to go to med school, and then I've been on the other side. I've actually been on the admissions committees, interviewing students, reviewing your applications. And I will tell you, what is the scariest thing is after the interview, we spend more of our time on interview days amongst our committee members talking about the, oh my goodness, I can't believe they did that. So you don't want to be the, oh no, you didn't. You want to be the one where the committee member comes in and goes, let me tell you about this kid I saw today. So basically today, the first thing is we're going to sort of do a quick check-in on where we are in the application cycle. And then I'm going to give you some of my tips and pointers about making yourself a successful applicant. If any of you guys got an opportunity to see my Facebook Live event on Monday, and if you didn't, just go to our College Admissions and Beyond website, and the video is actually in our videos group. But I talked about my 10 to be's or to not to be to make you a successful applicant, and I alluded to the fact that we would talk more about your dress, your presentation, and everything today. So that's what we're going to focus on. But before I get started, I need to sort of get an idea of where everyone is. So I want to do a quick poll So if you see the poll up here, I'm just trying to figure out where everybody is in the application cycle. Have you already applied, meaning is your application in right now, or are you applying in the upcoming cycle or future cycles down the road? So it looks like from everything here that we've got probably about 80% of you guys have already applied, which means you're either hard intent and working on secondaries or you're waiting on that all important interview. So hopefully that'll be coming soon. And for those of you guys applying in this upcoming cycle, even more important. So as you know, in terms of the sort of checkpoint of where we are, hold on, let me go to the next slide. My slide does not want to advance. Oh, hold on one second. Looks like our PowerPoint needs to reload. Give me 1 second. My apologies, everyone. I do not know where it went, but we're going to get it back up. Every now and then these things crash, right? So we're opening and we're going to launch. Got to go with the flow. And I think that's kind of one of my first tidbits with you guys. You know, things happen. They do. They happen. You're going to get into your interview, you're going to stumble over a question or whatever. It's not the make or break. The world does not end, okay? I hope everyone can still see me. So where we are in the application process. So you guys know Texas and AACOMAS opened the 1st of May. AMCAS opened the 1st of June. They released to the schools the end of June, well, May, June. And secondaries started flooding in. And I know a lot of my students were like, oh my goodness, I've gotten so many secondaries. Well, because of the sheer number of applicants, if you figure that there are anywhere from about 51 to 55,000 applicants every year to medical school, the average student's applying to about 16 schools. That's over 800,000 applications that are going through the whole system. So a large portion of schools, and an estimate now is about 80 to 90% of schools automatically generate secondaries. That means there's an automatic generation of your secondary when a school sees that you've applied to them, but not necessarily that they've reviewed or looked at your application. Now that doesn't mean get discouraged, but that also doesn't mean that you're going to get an interview at all of those schools. So it just means a lot of schools give you the opportunity to submit a secondary, and if you make it through your screen, they will look at your secondary, but that doesn't mean that there's a guarantee they're going to look at that. And I have worked with a number of schools where a lot of those submitted secondaries will not make the screen and don't get looked at. Okay, don't be discouraged. But I'm already getting students now, and we're here in mid-August going, should I panic? I haven't gotten any interviews yet. Try to wrap your head around what's going on, okay? 50,000 plus applications, hundreds of thousands of secondaries. The average school is going to get anywhere from 7,000 to 15,000 applications. So there's a whole process of going through those screening. Most of that's that electronic screen that we already are aware of. Also understanding that summer is really a time of flux, and most admissions committees don't start to reassemble until about this August timeframe. Now, if you're a Texas school, obviously because of their match program that comes out in November, they've already started conducting interviews in July and August. AACOMAS, a lot of the osteopathic programs have already started granting interviews, but when you're talking about most of the allopathic programs, most of the MD programs, many of those schools do not start granting interviews until September and October. But it is rolling admissions for most schools. So it is about being the first one through. So that is getting your application in early, getting your secondaries in early. A good rule of thumb when we're talking about secondaries, switching to my next slide, a good rule of thumb when we're talking about secondaries is to think about that you want to turn them around if they don't give you a deadline within 2 to 3 weeks after receiving them. All of that flood of secondaries you got the first part of July, you want to shoot to get them in August so that your secondaries will be some of the first ones reviewed. I get a lot of students who are absolutely panicking because they're like, well, my friend got an interview from such and such, but I haven't gotten an interview. Yes, it is about being the first one through the gate, but it also depends on where you fall in terms of whoever your committee reviewer is. So a lot of schools disperse primary applications out to their review committees, and those folks are reviewing those as well. So there are so many factors at play. Okay, so just because you've gotten an early interview doesn't mean necessarily that you're the first person in. Just because you haven't gotten an interview doesn't mean that you're not, that all hope is lost. So I'll give you a very good example. Okay, my son applied to med school. My son's a third year medical student. He applied to medical school 3 years ago. In the process of that, the school that he got his first interview at was his first acceptance. The school that he got his second interview at, the first week that they offered interviews in September, he was not accepted to. In the school that he interviewed in November, he heard back 2 weeks later. So there are all types of perspectives of what goes on. I have a student last year who submitted late, did not get an interview until the end of March at a state-supported school. We kind of thought all hope was lost, but here's the thing. Your interview can count up to 60% of the total weighted score when you go through committee. And this particular student went in, nailed and aced her interview after we prepped. And not only did she get in, she ended up with a full scholarship. So there are so many different things at play. So it's important to be early in, secondary strongly submitted and in early, presenting a very strong interview, which we're getting ready to talk about, and to have the appropriate follow-up throughout the entire application cycle. But you've also got to remember that the typical acceptance rate is only about 40% of everyone who applies, which means, and I actually will be doing a webinar on this coming up, on you may have a great MCAT, you may have a great GPA, and still about 50% of those kids do not gain an acceptance. Part of that relates to other things in their application, but part of it is there are just not enough slots for everybody who applies. So it's not like college. Bright kids know they're going to get into a college. Bright kids don't always get into med school the first time, but there are things that you can do to make yourself most successful, and that's what we're going to talk about. So your application was in early, your secondaries were submitted, and you've received information that you're getting an interview. There are so many things that kids forget to think about. They get so caught up in how do I present the perfect interview? What is going to make the perfect interview topics, and they forget to think about everything else before it. So let me couch this for you guys as someone who interviews on the other side. Okay, remember that interviewing is a small part of our day. Interviewing is exhausting. Interviewing is very stressful for us, the interviewers. As the interviewee, I know that this is your claim to fame. This is what you have waited your whole life to get to, the all-important interview. But also understand for us that we've heard and listened to the same things over and over again. So the first thing that you guys need to understand is your interview starts the minute you walk through the door. So when we talk about dress to impress, that's going to be critical. When we talk about your presentation during the interview, that's going to be critical. So many things are even as important, if not more important, than the actual answers that you generate. So let's start with the first part. You've gotten your interview. So make your plans. If your interview, and I always say, if your interview is more than an hour away, and sometimes probably even less than an hour away, you should plan to get to your interview site the day beforehand. Go early, book a hotel, go to the location of where your interview is going to be at. Make sure that you know how to get to the school. I don't know as a number of students who have talked to me who tried to make that drive on the day of. You have no control over what's going to happen with traffic, whatever. You want to be best prepared. Okay, so you find your site. Let's talk about what you're going to wear. How important is what you're going to wear? A lot. Think about the presentation that you create. I want you guys to put yourself into the position of, think about when you go to class the first day for a class. If your professor walks in looking in some old and busted sort of outfit or whatever, you automatically generate a perception of a person based on their appearance. And oftentimes we've seen some of these staged webinars where they've taken people and they've sort of taken somebody and made them look like a homeless person or vice versa. And that just general perception, and I'm not saying that I think any of you guys are going to go to your interview looking like a homeless person, but you'd be surprised at some of the things that do walk through the door. So let's talk first about your outfit. Okay, so when you talk about your dress, yes, it should be a suit. Okay, I know that that can be an expensive investment, so there are other options. You can think about things like secondhand stores or whatever, but you want to have a well-fitting, tailored suit. General rule of thumb is gray, black, blue. Gray is the most popular. Black is generally second, or blue. Oftentimes people shy away from blue because sometimes it's harder to sort of match shoes or clothing with that. Gray tends to blend or match with more things. Black tends to be a very stark statement. Definitely for guys. For girls, you should wear a suit as well. And guys often ask me, by the way, can I wear a sport coat and khaki pants? You can, but we do recommend against it. Buy a suit, look professional for your day. For women, it does not matter. You can wear pants or a skirt. Whatever you do, wear what you feel most comfortable in. Okay, if it's going to be cold, if you feel more comfortable in pants, it is perfectly fine to wear pants. Women often ask me, okay, if I wear a skirt, should I wear pantyhose? Pantyhose are totally out of style. And I often get this joke from people who go, well, my legs are kind of ashen or whatever, then put some lotion on. Okay, in this day and time, typically it is more appropriate to dress in just a skirt, not without pantyhose, and with heels. Here's something else: no ballet flats. I get that you may be walking on your tour or whatever, but you want to shy away from ballet flats and what we call hooker heels, which are the really tall stiletto heels. Ideally, you want to shoot for something that is 1 inch to 2 inches. You want to make sure that they're broken in, but not old shoes that you wore. For both women and men, you want to make sure that your shoes are polished and shine, that they don't have scuff marks or whatever, and it does create an image. Now let's talk about the shirt. Okay, so for guys, most commonly, and you will see when you go into your interviews, we see people in dark suits, white shirts, dark tie. Aside from the fact that you all look like a bunch of penguins parading through, you look just like everybody else. You don't want to be a blend master. You want to stand out and you want to be unique. Interesting thing, before my son interviewed, we actually bought him 2 suits. He had a dark suit and a charcoal suit, and he bought a shirt and a tie for each individual location that matched something that was coordinated with that particular school. So for instance, when he interviewed at Wake Forest, he actually wore his charcoal gray suit with a little bit lighter gray shirt and a very dynamic gold, gray, and black tie. And we do talk about a power tie. It sort of reflected the school, but it was also a very, very sharp sort of suit. When he interviewed at Chapel Hill, he wore a light blue shirt with a very dynamic power tie. Now, when I say a power tie for men, you want a dynamic, unique tie that really is eye-catching and appealing. I can tell you that my son said that every single interview that he went to, someone commented on the sharpness of his dress. Funny thing, a couple of the deans with the med schools that I work at often say, I can always tell when you've dressed your interviewers for their interview. One of the things that you want to do is you want to create a memorable appearance. So if you have a very sharp dress with a very dynamic tie that will create a memory and that it will be different from other folks, you will already stand out with your interviewer. For women, here's another thing. So for guys, they typically have this nice button down with this tie that keeps everything in line. For girls, I strongly suggest that you avoid collared shirts or shirts with ruffles, because in our suits, because they're not button downs, we never can get that to lay correctly. What I recommend is that you consider, think about what your best color is. And you know, if you're wearing something that makes you feel really good and dynamic, which I probably should have worn something today that would have been one of my best colors, but typically people tell me that I look good in red or deeper colors. And so if you're wearing a color that you feel like you look good in, your confidence is already going to come up. For women, I recommend that you pick either a straight or a scoop neck blouse. It can be a sleeveless blouse or a short sleeve blouse, or if it's cold, it can be a long sleeve blouse, but a shell underneath your suit coat. What happens is this creates a very clean front that we're looking at. So you have the lapel, and then you have this very clean shirt underneath it. This will draw the attention to your face and when we are talking to you. When we talk to women about jewelry, ideally choose to be something that is conservative but also unique. Oftentimes we say stay away from pearls because pearls can be kind of, cliches or whatever. Oftentimes we say pick a simple necklace that may have a unique pendant, maybe something that someone may ask you about. When we talk about earrings, generally you wouldn't want something that dropped as much as this. Typically no more than an inch, and an inch drop, and it can be a stud. That's perfectly fine. But again, you're trying to create a very professional look. Men, if you're going to get a haircut, ideally you want to make it at least 3 to 4 days before your interview, so you get that professional look. Oftentimes I get men ask me, is it okay to have facial hair? Absolutely, it's okay to have facial hair. Just make sure that it's groomed and presentable. For women, oftentimes I've had girls go, I want to wear my hair up in a bun because it's supposed to look like that. And if you don't wear your hair up in a bun, don't put your hair in a bun. If you know you play with your hair, I don't typically play with your hair, but if you know that you're playing and fussing with your hair, then wear it some way that it's back, or wear it half up, half down, which looks very professional. But if you've got very thin hair that will fall down, you don't want something that throughout the day you're going to be very self-conscious of, because it's going to be a day-long process. So professional, groomed, well done. Oftentimes I have women who ask me, they were thinking they wouldn't wear any makeup. Well, I can guarantee you most of the people you're going to be interviewing with are going to be wearing makeup. It should be professional. So don't go in with some exotic eyeshadow and false eyelashes and all of that, but you don't want to look washed out. So a conservative eyeliner, mascara, a very light, either just gloss on your lips or a light colored foundation, and just a small amount of blush. I often recommend that you go to a makeup counter if you're not really good with doing your makeup, and have someone teach you how to do a professional makeup. It is about being presentable. Your interview starts the minute you walk through the door. And so many people are unaware of this, because a lot of our conversations, I can tell you, we had a girl interview last year, and all of us can tell you what color underwear she had on because her skirt was so short. One of the girls that I spoke with said, I did not think that I thought that I did not get in last year because I was not appealing enough. And she had a very large chest, and she wore a suit where the girls were all out and up in front and center. And I can tell you that did not create a positive appearance. We're going to talk a little bit more about your conduct during your interview. So you know how to dress. You have gotten to your interview on time. Your interview starts the minute you walk through the door. So when you walk through the door, if there is someone checking you in, you need to be professional and engaging. Extend your hand. Introduce yourself with a firm handshake. Now, don't break their hands, but don't give them some old dish towel thing either. Introduce yourself. If you have a way that you would like to be called, or if you have a name that's difficult, my name is Dr. Anita Paschal. Everybody says Paschal. So I have literally gotten to the point of where I go, hi, my name's Dr. Anita Paschal, rhymes with rascal, call me Anita. Whatever works best for you. Create an engaging dialogue, because I'm going to tell you, when we're interviewing you, we're looking for as much as your answers as the way that you present yourself. And that is so critical, because we want to know, are you going to be able to engage with patients? Are you going to be able to engage with your fellow classmates? So you want to start that rapport. Same thing. When you sit down with your other interviewees, don't think that we're not watching or listening to you. I had a girl in one of our osteopathic programs, and the program was a little bit more remote. It wasn't in a main area. You don't even want to know how she referred to using a derogatory slang and curse word with her other interviewees during that moment, and saying, it was a long way to such and such to find my way out here to the middle of blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh my goodness, you did not just say that in the middle of our interview room. And then I listened to another girl say, well, this is my backup school, and if I get into somewhere else. So it's surprising. I think sometimes when people get nervous, It's just where we talk about like word vomit. I think it happens a lot. The other thing is be aware, cell phones off, out of your pocket, leave them in your car if you think it's going to be a hindrance. Women often say, can I bring a pocketbook? Absolutely, you can bring a pocketbook. It helps to give a place to put your keys and other stuff. Do not bring a snack. We plan to provide for you guys. I often have people say, I think I'll bring a little water bottle and a snack. We're going to take care of you, okay? We're not going on a field trip. Don't bring your backpack, okay? Be professional. For gentlemen, if you'd like to bring a portfolio, that's fine. For women, if you'd like to bring a portfolio, make sure it fits in your pocketbook so you're not carrying a whole bunch of stuff. Most often schools will provide you with something, but you don't want to be carrying that around all day. So make sure that you're organized in what you do. No, do not bring me your CV. Do not bring a copy of your application. We have everything we need. This is your interview. This is not a job interview, although this is the job for the rest of your life. Okay, so when you come up, you want to be engaging, you want to sit down, you want to sit down in your location with someone else. You want to have the opportunity to interact. If you are set in a different location from where your interview is, be aware of your conduct during that time. So make sure that you're sitting down with other folks, but you're sitting there not too relaxed and casual. Had an interview last year, came into the interview space. One of the interviewees had his feet up on the counter, on the desk while we came in. I said, what are you doing? He said, I was just relaxing. I had another interview where I came in and the interviewee was working on her laptop, and I said, what are you doing? And she said, I have a paper due tomorrow. And I said, and you're going to work on it in the middle of your interview time? And she said, well, I haven't started to interview yet. So, I mean, it's interesting. You need to be aware of the things that you do and you say during your interview process. So now you're going to your interviewee. Whether you walk up to your interviewee and they come to get you, or you go to their office, you want to remember the same thing. You want to extend your hand. You want to create your greeting. You allow your interviewee to return the greeting, and then you create an icebreaker. What you're trying to do is to take it from two people who have not known each other to establishing a conversation. We're trying to see how you're going to be in the future when you're interviewing with your patients. Can you establish dialogue? Are you approachable? Okay. The other thing is when you sit down in your chair, so I want you guys to see me. So my chair is a straight up, back and down. So if I lean back with my back straight up in the chair, see how I kind of collapse, versus if you sit, so there's about 2 to 3 inches between your back and the back of the chair, then you have a more presentable presentation to your interviewer. The other thing you want to think about is, remember, we're bored to tears. This is the most important thing to you, but you want to be engaging with us. So what you want to do is periodically throughout your interview, you want to think about what you have is your home base. So I'm left-handed. So for whatever reason, I typically cross my left leg over my right leg and I set my hands in the left side of it. So this is your home base. So where you put your hands. But then as you answer a question, you may want to answer, you may want to lean in, you may want to have conversation, but this reminds you to return to your home base. I'm really bad about talking with my hands, so I'm always like this. But if you can remind yourself to get back to your presentable aspect at the completion of your interview conversation, then you're good. Okay, so now we've sort of got you dressed. We've gotten you into your interview space, and we've got you positioned where you are to be engaging. You want to remember to engage with your interviewers. One of the biggest mistake I have is that people talk at me instead of with me during an interview. How do you talk with someone versus talking at them? You know who you are. So before you go to your interview, I recommend that every applicant know their strengths and weaknesses. We talk about know your CV or know your resume, but oftentimes that's not even good enough. Go back to your application, and I recommend that you create a list. You create a list that are going to be your applicant's strengths, your top selling points. You need to have at least 5 One of them has got to be clinical, and one of them ideally should be service, because those are two really big things for us. And if you have something that's a strong part of your application, be it research, be it leadership, whatever it is, you need to write down what are your top selling points. So I recommend breaking it into what I have are our 5 top categories. Your academics, which know your GPA, know your MCAT, but know other things you've done. Have you done a study abroad? Have you done research? Have you, TA'd or tutored? Have compiled your number of hours. If you've researched in 5 separate labs and what those are and what your total number of hours, so when you talk about your research, you already have that information. An interview killer is what we call deer in the headlights, okay? So you need to have that information, and you need to have not only have that information, but if it's your selling point, a list of your top bullet points that you would talk about. So for instance, if you've got, a common one is clinical research, or tell me about your clinical experience. So you should already be prepared to say, I've been really fortunate to get almost 500 hours of shadowing in 12 different specialties. That's included primary care, cardiothoracic surgery, orthopedics, etc. But working for the past year as a medical scribe has allowed me not only to get over 1,000 hours of hands-on clinical, but it's really helped me understand what medicine is about. As I've worked as a medical scribe at St. John's Hospital, my role in following the physician has given me a great opportunity to learn what he does, but it's changed my life in terms of working with patients. I can remember just this past week, and actually, interestingly enough, this is a scenario that actually happened. Walking into the ER on a shift one night, and we often talk about, there's that all-important question of, why do you want to be a doctor? And we hear this all the time, and that's probably one of the most common questions. And you may want to use your applicant strength, clinical strength to answer that question. When you get asked a question, we tell you to think about it as 4 stair steps. The first is what the question is. The second one is the segue to answer that question. The third step is going to take them to one of your selling points, because I need you guys to understand something very important. We hear the same answers over and over. We typically ask the same questions, and we're going to hear a lot of the basic same answers over and over. What we're going to remember is how you uniquely answered that specific question, and how am I going to remember the 3 to 4 things about you? Because in a typical day, I may interview 5 students. It's going to become a blur. Are you going to say something that is memorable, that impacts me? Does it move me? Does it stand out? Is it unique? And how you presented it. So I want you to think about your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. Think about, you don't remember all the dialogue. Okay, you remember the unique things that stand out, be it whether it was funny, whether it was heart-wrenching, whether it was unique. So for me, we always hear, I want to help and serve. I want to make a difference. I want to help the underserved. If I read one more secondary this week about underserved populations, and in my practice, no one will be turned away because they cannot afford to pay, or I will provide service for anyone, whether or not they can pay. I will tell you, we'll eat you alive in an interview, because we do want to provide service to underserved people. But if you're only going to treat people or if you're going to treat every person who can't afford to pay, how are you going to keep your lights on? There is so much more to that about getting involved in things. So there's a lot of finessing to how you answer questions, but you've got to reach deep in your gut. You've got to think about why you want to be a physician, more than help, serve, make a difference, love science, want to work with my hands, want to think critically. You want to think about every experience that you've done that helps you affirm this is where you need to be, whether it be research or whether it be learning how to teach and filling your passion for teaching, or a service thing that you've done, maybe with Meals on Wheels and walking into an elderly person's house and looking around and realizing you're probably the only person that they're going to see all week. It's not just about providing a meal. It's so much more. And when it comes to clinical, yes, we all want to make a difference. We all want to make people feel better. We all want to make a difference in somebody's lives and give them better quality of life. But it's not about you. Medicine is not about you, and it's not even about the patients or the treatments. It's about the reality that there are people. So when I talk to you about how that reference could come in, and if you say, why do you want to be a physician? Tell me something clinically. Why do you want to go into medicine in this day and time? And yes, there are those patented answers of help and serve and make a difference. But just this past week in the ER, walking into the ER and looking up on the board a name you recognize, of a 27-year-old who has battled cancer not once, not twice, not three, but 4 times before the age of 27. At 21, this young, aspiring, full of life individual developed a knot in the side of his face, which would turn out to be a very aggressive rhabdomyosarcoma with a spindulated fiber. So it engrossed his face. Within 3 weeks, he had a tennis ball size mass in his face. They removed it at 21. You think about where you are treating. This is somebody who's your age, right there in front of you. It relapsed within 6 months. He thought he was cancer free for 3 years. Back at when he was 25, months and months of radiation, treatment, everything. Back at 26. And this is actually a friend of mine. I would love to share a reference to the blog, because when you talk about what you go through, what patients go through, it is so much more than just treating them in that office. So at 26, he had exhausted all the radiation that his body could possibly muster. There was no chemotherapy alternative because it's very unresponsive to chemo. All he was left was with immunotherapy. He thought he had beat it one more time. He gathers the courage to fight again. And yet again, months and months have brought him to this point. And the reality is there was no change. And so he's back at home. His brother just got married a month ago in Sweden. He couldn't go home. He couldn't go for the wedding. When you look at where he is in life, the thing that gives him the most comfort is the time that he can spend with his dog. And it's brought him down to a point, the dog that has sat beside him through everything. And now he's too sick to even have her there with him. His brother has now moved home, quit his job, and moved home to help provide care. And this particular night, he's brought into the ER because he's coughing up blood from his cancer, sitting with a family who brought him to the ER because they just wanted to get it under control, realizing probably that his life is nearing an end. And so they took him, they just wanted to get him stabilized so he could go home, because his one wish was to die beside his dog. And they couldn't get it stabilized in this smaller ER, so they took him to Chapel Hill. And whether or not they can get him stabilized to give him his one wish, well, behind all of this, it's not just a cancer. It's not a patient. It's a family. It's a mom. A child should never die before their mom. So the mom's watching her son go through this. Brother's watching his brother go through this. Even the dog at home not understanding what's going on. Our role as physicians is so amazing, because we get an opportunity every day to meet patients with courage that changes our life, to meet others who change our lives. Sometimes we have good outcomes, sometimes we don't. But embracing the importance of research in that, embracing the importance of learning to teach or to tutor, to be able to explain to the family why they could not take him home. An appreciation of leadership, to be able to not only help lead that family, but to lead the other people in the ER or in office to understand and appreciate their role in what you're doing. To understand the role of service extends past just your shift in that ER. That's how it all fits together. That's how you learn to answer that question with a conviction, with an example that helps people understand that you truly get what you're in for, that you've truly done things that will help you be a good physician, and that you can create for them bullet points, and memories that will stand out in their head. So for you as an interviewee, when you get dressed, when you present yourself, and then when you sit down to talk, you need to have a way to create an answer to every question that is engaging with your interviewer, that has a thought process because you've already made those bullet points and you've practiced them, and you are prepared to answer a time you failed, a time that you've succeeded. Answer ethical questions, that you are prepared with top answers to questions. And if you're not prepared, to be able to pull within your experiences to create something that is relatable. Right before I turn this over to you guys, I'm going to give you an example. During my interview, and I actually remember this, and I'm old as the hills. I actually turned 54 in April. So this has been a long time since I had that interview, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I was grooving in my interview at UNC Chapel Hill, which is actually, as you know, where I ended up going to med school. I was interviewing with the dean that particular day. And we were talking, we were having a great conversation. He said, 1 minute. And he pulled out a drawer and he set down a picture in front of me. And that picture was somebody standing on a dock fishing with somebody, and there were some birds in the air, and he goes, tell me what you see in that picture. And I went, oh, good Lord, there goes my interview. And so I took the picture and I looked at it, and then I took the picture and I turned it around, I faced it to him, and I said, so I can talk about it and you can see it. I was stalling for time. That was my pregnant pause. And I looked at it and I said, you know, the truth is you probably showed this picture to hundreds of people, probably more. And I'm sure that some of the answers you get are about the person fishing, the birds in the air, and the observation. And the truth is, when we treat things, there is a regimen of things that we can treat. But there are also different nuances for the way that we can administer that treatment for successful outcomes. So you probably look at one or another, and you may look at this or that, and that's the understanding that you gain. So, and I said, so it's like medicine. There is a standard of treatment, but we should also embrace being collaborative with others to potentially have a way to treat. And he goes, finally, somebody who answered that right. So for me, that helped me understand better how to answer questions. Now, I'm going to turn it over and take some of your questions. But before I do, I want to give you guys an opportunity because if you would like more information about how to prepare for an interview, how to navigate the submissions process, how to prepare for your MCAT, just check one of these boxes below so that maybe we could help you out and reach out to you if you have want any additional information. And then I want to take some of your questions, so I'm going to turn it over. I'd like to apologize for the noise in the background because somebody just came through the yard, and I actually have 3 dogs, so it sounds like madness and mayhem, but those things happen with interviews. Sometimes your polls close, right? So thank you guys so much for your time. I'm going to turn it back over, and can I take some questions?
The first question that I have is asking you to repeat the picture answer you gave.
The picture answer? Are you talking about the one when I was, oh, the answer that I gave? So what I did was I pointed out the things that I saw in the picture, and I said, you've probably had shown this picture many, many times, and you've had people comment on these specific things, and that's the typical things that you see. For instance, we have strep throat. You treat strep throat with this, and that's what you want to do. But it's a more important aspect to be reflective of the other things you see. I said, because we all take a different viewpoint. In working as a physician, oftentimes we have a standard of care, but we will often collaborate with our other physicians. We may take a different approach. Let's just think about my friend who is battling cancer right now. There was a basic line of care, but then sometimes you have to think outside that box to think of other alternatives, a different way of looking at things. The whole reason he gave me that picture was to see if I could look at that picture from a different perspective.
Great, thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
More questions, yes. So is there a rubric for MMI interviews? And if so, how would they be graded?
Yeah, we actually almost every school is a little different. We all have a different approach of how we grade people. Typically, there is a scale. Some schools use a 10-point scale. Some schools use a 99-point scale. And this is actually pretty much true whether it's a traditional one-on-one interview or an MMI. And each station has a ranking for that. Again, like if it's a 10-point scale, and this is actually, it's a really good point. We're looking at your composure. If it's a scenario and you're asked to role play, one of the things that we rank you on is not only your answer, but what we talked about, those dynamics. So for instance, let's say that you've got your card and you're a physician and you come in and they're wanting you to role play an interaction with a patient. So the first thing we're looking at is, are you standing at me like this? Or do you sit down and do you bring yourself to eye level with the patient? Do you set your card down? Do you interact with them? Do you engage? Do you keep eye contact? And how well you answer the question with the scenario. So, one of them that we often give, and I know that we've given several times, is you've got a 14-year-old in your office. She wants to talk about birth control. She asks you while her mom leaves the room if she can talk to you in private about that. Her mother insists on staying in the room. How do you answer that? So you might want to talk about and how you appreciate a conversation like that. And do you approach the parent and say, there are some things that I would like to discuss with your daughter in private, not that I don't want to discuss with you, but I need to get some information. Would you mind stepping outside the room? How do you approach that? Another really common one is an ethical one, like if you're taking a test and you see that the person 2 desks down from you slides something out from underneath their exam paper and you have a question that they might be cheating, how would you approach that? So when you're doing MMI questions like that, there are a lot of those scenarios. And if any of you guys have taken the Casper exam, it's a lot of times that's replacing some of our MMI interviews. So again, typically it's anywhere from a 1 to a 99-point scale or a 1 to 10. Again, 10 and 99 tend to be your highest. We're looking at your presentation, your interaction, how well you answer the question. So it's pretty well split between those dynamics. Hopefully that answered your question. Anybody else?
Yes, and we have more questions. So how long should you limit your answers to? Like, what's a good length for
It's always so hard to talk about because it's, long enough to cover the topic, not too short and to drone on. But I do often find that folks struggle with when to cut their answer off. First of all, if you see your interviewer kind of zoning out or whatever, that can be one of your signs. One of the biggest things I think that people struggle with is providing enough information about the background of what they're talking about. So for instance, let's say that you want to talk about a particularly memorable service event that you had when you went to Haiti. I actually had somebody engage in this the other week because we talked about, I've worked in Haiti for like the past 30 years. And one of the things that they wanted to talk about was their experience in Haiti because it was life-changing. A particular town that they were in, there had been rioting and the fear that she had experienced. So anyway, she wanted to intro it. So she talked about it and she said, tell me about your most memorable service experience. And she said, I've had an opportunity to get involved in so many types of service experiences because I've worked as a mentor with Big Brother, Big Sister. I've done a lot of things on campus with my sorority. I work with Meals on Wheels. But this past summer, I had the opportunity to go to Haiti with a group called Friends of Haiti. And while we were in Haiti, we engaged in. And so what you need to do is you need to create first, you've got to take them there. Okay, so you give them a sound bite of other stuff you've done because oftentimes people get so excited to jump right into that answer. And then I'm sitting here going, I wonder if they've done any other service, because remember, about 90% of medical school interviews are blinded, which means we haven't looked at your application. And if at most, I've probably just glanced over it with my other interviewees for that day. So we're not going to remember the facts about you. And I can tell you that would be one of the most memorable things for you when you're practicing either in front of your laptop or practicing in a camera. For me, it's always like when I'm washing my hair. If I could lecture from the shower, I'd probably do great because I get my best ideas there. When you're driving down the road. So when you're practicing, you want to get feedback on whether or not the people on the other side felt like they were there. So if you're going to talk about Haiti being your most important service event, you need to tell us when, you need to tell us how you got there, and you need to set the scene. So while in Haiti, we were responsible for setting up mobile clinics. We were in Port-au-Prince, and our typical clinic ran for 12 hours a day. We'd see about 500 people during that day. Some of the people that I remembered, but I tell you the thing that stood out for me the most. And that's going to be your one story, your one focal point that you can summarize. Ideally, you don't want an answer to go more than 2 minutes in length, and you think, man, that doesn't sound like long. That's an eternity. 30 to 45 seconds is generally a good time frame to think about, but you also need to make sure that you have covered the topic. You can also be responsive back to your interviewer going, did I give you enough information? Did you have any other questions, or did you feel good with that? Also remember, because I oftentimes get students go, I felt like I totally bombed that interview. My interviewer wasn't engaged. Well, sometimes they may be distracted. They may be having a bad day, but actually a couple of the places I interview, we almost do a good cop, bad cop. And so we'll have somebody who may be very engaging with you, and then another one who we specifically target to be very distant and non-interactive, because we want to see oftentimes how you're going to interact with a hostile patient. We have time for like maybe 3 or 4 more questions, depending upon how long I yap.
Okay, if you get a interview question and you don't understand one of the words, like there's a vocabulary word that you don't get, is it better to try to infer what it means and answer the question that way, or to ask the person interviewing you for the definition of the word?
It is absolutely okay to clarify. We don't at all think that you guys are stupid or ignorant. Well, you wouldn't have gotten to that point in the interview if you did. It is perfectly fine to reflect back and answer the question. However, can I please caution you guys on something? The other thing we hate is for you to parrot the answer back to us. One of the questions that we often say, if there's only one seat left in the class, why should we give it to you? And 9 times out of 10, I will get, if you only had one seat left in the class, I would recommend that you give it to me because of blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh my goodness, please don't do that. It's like just seeing that same commercial over and over again. It's the same thing when you talk about secondary answers, when it goes, our school does such and such, what was your most, and then they'll start with my most memorable. And so you want to be diverse. You're trying to be memorable. Okay, so if you don't understand something, you are so much better to ask for clarification. I would recommend that you go, I think you're asking me, do I such and such? Is that what you're referring with that word? I'm not quite familiar with that. It is okay. One of the things we're looking for is to see, can you be humble? Can you be approachable? So yes, absolutely fine. Next question.
I have a question about kind of dress and appearance. Two-parter is, like, a red lipstick or okay? Is that considered professional? And what do you mean by women should wear a shell underneath their suit jacket?
Okay, so let's start with the lipstick. As a general rule, we say to shy away from reds and really dark colors. If you do, make sure it's a muted red and it's more matte. I actually don't have any on, which probably wasn't very good for my interview for today. But generally, something that is a subtle color, unless, of course, you've got on a red blouse or whatever. And again, try to make it more muted. You really want to look to make sure that it's just not really stark. When we talk about a shell, we're talking about a blouse. Oftentimes you think about camis, cami tops that have the little straps. You want to avoid that, because if it gets really hot and you need to take your jacket off, you obviously don't want bra straps and cami tops. So ideally we can say either a sleeveless blouse or one that has cap sleeves, or some blouses, especially if it's winter, can be longer. But we say that it would be like a blouse with a straight cut, or a scoop, or like a scoop neck. Nothing really high collared up here. You don't look like you're a nun or whatever, but you also don't want it to be so terribly low cut. So when I'm saying a shell, that means like a blouse, like a, just an not an undershirt, but like a silk, And the same thing here. You want to try to avoid like a really soft looking cotton because you want it to look professional. So, but you don't want like a little really bright silk. So something very professional, like a with a low sheen to it. I often tell folks even though to try to avoid too many pastels because sometimes like seafoam greens and things like that, unless it's your great color and you can really pull it off with your suit, can kind of wash you out. For women, sometimes they may have a unique suit coat that may have like a underlying part with it that's different from the bottom part of their skirt or pant, and that can be very unique as well. I had a student the other day who actually had a red jacket with a black belt with a cami underneath it, and it looked absolutely awesome. Like it was just so striking, and I remember it. Another girl wore a houndstooth print jacket that was very remarkable, very distinct, and stood out. Next question.
Can you review some examples of icebreakers your interview might ask you?
Anything but the weather. Please do not comment on the weather. I often recommend that people kind of look around the room, look around the surroundings. One of the interviews that I had, they had just redone the floors in this particular place, and they had actually put like encrusted decals of like creatures and different types of animals and stuff in the floor, and they commented on how remarkable and unique that was. I actually had a kid last year who went for an interview, and his interviewee had the same tie on that he did, and he was like, well, we obviously got the same dress going on. You may comment on something that you notice in their office. In my old office, actually, you guys can see in the background, I have a 100-gallon saltwater aquarium back there, but I had a big aquarium right by my desk that had a giant blood parrot red devil fish in it. It was about this big. And I swore I was going to move the aquarium because I would ask that question and everybody would flip out and freak out. What would be your icebreaker? And they go, oh, it's a really unique fish you have over here. And it's just because they were so unprepared. So just be aware of your surroundings and something that you can comment on. It's always a good icebreaker. One of the things, maybe if you're from a school and the rivalries are playing in the upcoming season or something like that, a connection that you might have. You know, we know that a lot of people apply to in-state schools, but there are only so many slots, but there may be a connection there. So you just want to try to find something that would be relatable. Next question.
If you have an institutional action in your application, should you mention it or should you wait for the interviewer to address it?
Well, if you've already, I mean, you should have already addressed it in your application and given an explanation for that, as well as in your secondaries. So as a general rule, unless they ask about it, it's not topic for there, because if they've already looked at your application, and you also don't want it to necessarily be a deterrent. Most of the programs that I interview at, we have somebody from your interview who will be your representative for a committee, and then you will have somebody who's reviewed your application so they can provide that insight. So generally they come together and both of them present you before committee. Just as a backside for that, a lot of people will say, man, I interviewed like really early and I haven't heard back. Well, remember, people interview in groups. It takes a lot of time, so we have to have interviewees ready to do that interview. Then once you get interviewed, the summary of your interviews goes into a pile, and when committee meets, it doesn't always mean that just because you interviewed this week, you go before the committee that week, because it is often dependent on the person who did your interview review. Are they in committee that week? So there are so many things, again, at play that dictate when you sort of may or may not be reviewed, when you hear or don't hear. As a general rule, what I always say is no news is actually good news, because that means you're still in the running if you haven't gotten a denial. This is a year-long process. You need to be patient with it. I think I have time for one more question. Do you have one more for me?
Yes. Would you ever get asked questions about healthcare policy?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, you will. And you need to know that we don't expect you to be all knowing. Okay, we don't expect you to know everything about Obamacare. We don't expect you to know everything about, equal access. We don't expect you to know everything, but we do expect you to be informed. There are tons and tons of things on the website about, top things to know for your med school interview, about healthcare reform. You need to understand the aspects about, the prior aspects about Obamacare, what has changed. You need to understand insurance coverage. I also need to tell you guys, you need to be careful about things you venture into. Oftentimes you can have an opinion and your opinion is very valid, but it is also, if you have a strong opinion on one side, so for instance, and there are a lot of questions that are typically what considered illegal, but you still may be asked, like, if you get into our school and such, what would you do? You do need to answer those questions, and you need to answer them with solid thoughts. So those are things you need to be putting in there. But if you're talking about healthcare, or you want to take a stand, or just like we talked about providing access to everyone, I will tell you, if every single person who in their secondary wrote to me about how they plan to change the access for healthcare, and that they will never turn away anyone because of ability to pay, and they plan to open an indigent care clinic where that's all they're going to serve, and regardless of whether or not they can pay, we would have no issues to uninsured, underrepresented groups, because they would all be taken care of. The truth is, people go through med school, bills pile up, you get married, you have to keep the lights on. So you need to be more forward thinking about what issues there are with access, steps that we can take to increase access, steps we can create better education, and ways to create a healthier population, and how do we do those. And one of the things I will tell you, I haven't read a single secondary this year who's talked about anybody other than just opening a clinic and going somewhere about getting involved at the state and the national level. Nobody, not one person has written to me about getting involved in their local academy for whatever they're going to go into. Nobody's talked about, maybe potentially taking a role as a leader, as the president of the American Academy of Family Physicians, to advocate for primary care. Nobody has talked about that. You need to have better thoughts about the way you're going to administer these things, and a basic understanding of healthcare today and the way we're going. And that's an hour reading up on a website that will get you there. I want to thank you guys so much for your time. I hope that some of you guys expressed an interest in admissions help. We'll take advantage of some of the tools that we have. We've got tons of resources, from interview prep to reviewing your personal statement to packages that really cater to all aspects of the application process, be it help with your primary, your secondary, help with the entire process. We have programs that allow you to work just directly one-on-one with me. It's called our Premier package, so that I can help you throughout the whole process. Also, don't forget, we have amazing MCAT prep for all of you guys that can take you through anything, be it self-paced, be it one-on-one directed tutoring, be it our in-class or our live online classes. They are amazing. We have 24/7 tutoring support. If you are struggling with organic chemistry, like I felt like I spent my entire semester doing, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you got a test, we have 24-hour access. Somebody can be with you within a minute to help answer your questions. Take advantage of our resources that we have here at the Princeton Review. This webinar will actually be posted within 24 hours, and if you signed up, you will get a link. I wish you guys all the best of luck, because I will tell you, there is nothing better than getting that acceptance letter, or now they're mostly acceptance emails, but for me, the students I work with, every time I get that, it is like me getting accepted all over again. So reach for your dreams, but know why you're reaching for them. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'll talk to you later.